Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Clackamas County Commissioners Land Use Hearing. We'll call to order, and now I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everyone. We are holding this hearing in person and Zoom. The Zoom link and instructions to participate via Zoom are located at clackamas.us/meetings/BCC/land-use. Today we will consider ZDO-285, a package of amendments to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning and Development Ordinance that primarily responds to certain land use legislation approved in the 2021, 2022, 2023 Oregon legislative session and recent state rulemaking. Public testimony will be taken this morning. If you are participating in person and wish to testify, please fill out a blue card and place it in the basket. And if you will be called to testify at the appropriate time. If you are participating in Zoom and wish to testify, we will prompt you regarding how to do that when the time is right. When you are called on, please to be sure to include your name and the area where you live. I would like to remind all participants, including staff, elected officials, and members of the public, that Robert's Rules of Order will be enforced during this public hearing. We welcome your opinions and look forward to your polite participation. The hearing will proceed as follows. Number one, first, we will hear a presentation from Principal Planning Staffer Martha Fritzie. We will then open the hearing for public testimony, beginning with public officials. If any public officials wish to testify today, you will have 5 minutes. Then representatives of any recognized community planning organization and agencies wishing to testify will have 3 minutes. Finally, members of the public wishing to testify will have 3 minutes also. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. Assisting us today in our hearing is Clerk Tony Marinick here, Principal Planner Martha Fritzie, and Assistant County Counsel Caleb Hugel. We will now begin the hearing on ZDO-285 with planning staff's presentation of their report and recommendation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think Tony's getting a presentation up. In the meantime, I put right in front of you 3 new pieces of testimony that came in late yesterday or early this morning. I believe you have seen 2 of them from 2 different CPOs because you were CC'd on them. There is one in there from a member of the public that you probably have not read. That would be Exhibit 24. So I will go ahead and get started. As the Chair mentioned, we are here for consideration of ZDO-285. It is a legislative amendment package. It includes potential amendments to 1 chapter of the comprehensive plan and 21 different sections of the zoning and development ordinance. There are a number of items included in this amendment package. It includes some clarifying language in what we come to you every year with as sort of minor and time-sensitive amendments. It includes some mandatory amendments to comply with state law and line our zoning code up with state law. But this year it also includes a couple of new housing options that were enabled by various bills through the state legislature. So a little bit of background on how we got here is back in October, we came to the board at a policy session to talk about these housing options that were enabled by the legislature. You all directed us to go forth and draft the amendments and take them out for public comment and through the hearings process, and that's why we're here today. We have also talked with the Planning Commission a couple times at a work session and a Planning Commission hearing. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. And then we also had set up a webpage to specifically talk about these 2 optional housing components, including a survey, a sort of high-level survey to gauge the public's feelings on these items. And I held an online Q&A session in April which had about 20 attendants and some very good discussion and questions. So what is it exactly that's included in ZDO 285? There's a lot of amendments. They're sort of doing 5 main things, though. One is allowing for accessory dwelling units in rural residential zones, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second is allowing recreational vehicles for residential use as a second dwelling. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other ones that I'm just going to very briefly touch upon are the mandatory requirements. Under state law, there were some changes made to the way we look at replacement dwellings in agriculture and forest zones. There were several bills that included expanding allowances primarily in the urban area for different housing types or different affordable housing at different densities. And then, of course, there's the minor and non-substantive changes that staff, as we administer our zoning and development ordinance, we find that are things that are needed for clarity, to get rid of conflicts, to clean up typos, references, things like that. So I'm just going to jump in and spend a few minutes on both numbers 1 and 2, the optional items. So I'm going to first talk about rural ADUs. And I just want to be clear before we start this conversation, we are talking about a dwelling. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. It's a full dwelling with a kitchen, bathroom, can have a laundry. It needs to be permitted, connected to all of the same utilities and sewage disposal, water, all the same things as your regular dwelling. It can be attached, it can be detached, it could be an internal conversion, it can be in your basement, it can be in your attic. There's lots of ways you could develop an accessory dwelling unit, but the important thing to keep in mind is that it is a dwelling. So until recent legislation, ADUs are not new. We've heard about them for years and years, and in fact, the county allows ADUs in urban areas and has for several decades. What's new is that until this recent legislation, the county could not allow ADUs outside of urban growth boundaries. And so now we can. We have this option, but the state law specifies that it's only rural residential zones. So we are not talking about farm and forest zones. We're not talking about the EFU, ag forest, and timber zones in the county. And the law also specifies that it has to be outside of an urban reserve. So I threw together a quick map. I know this is very, very hard to see. This isn't intended to identify anyone's specific property, but just give you a sense of where these rural residential zones are, where this potential allowance would apply if we choose to adopt it. So it is optional, like I said, but if the county decides to allow for this, there are certain requirements that the state says you have to put on these. First and foremost is a minimum lot size of 2 acres. So within those blue areas on that previous map, there's about 8,300 lots that are 2 acres that would maybe potentially be able to build an ADU. There's a maximum size of 900 square feet. It has to be located within 100 feet of the primary dwelling. We could go closer, we cannot allow farther than that under state law. There can only be one other dwelling on the property. There's some language specifically about it not being a nuisance property. It has to have adequate water and sewage disposal. It cannot be used as a short-term rental. And then the state law also adds some certain specific wildfire mitigation standards related both to construction types and also in some cases when the state adopts some wildfire maps, there'll be additional defensible space standards. So all of those are required. All of those are included in this package. The only additional, so the county is allowed to add some additional sort of reasonable standards. The only additional standards that staff has proposed related to this is to specify that the setback for the ADU has to be the same as for the primary dwelling. In some cases, accessory structures are allowed to be closer to property lines. In this case, both because there's some language in the bill about providing adequate setback from resource zones, and also because there's a 2-acre minimum lot size. We don't think it's going to create a great problem. We think it's appropriate for the ADU to have the same setback as a primary dwelling. So moving on to RVs as second dwellings. So a recreational vehicle, under our definition, which is essentially the same as state law definition, is very broad. It's a licensed vehicle with or without motive power, designed for human occupancy. It has a maximum gross floor area of 400 square feet in the setup mode, and includes, but not limited to, this whole laundry list: park trailers, travel trailers, pickup campers, motorhomes, fifth wheels, camping and tent trailers. So it is pretty broad, and I just wanted to bring that up because we get asked a lot, well, what is an RV? It could be a lot of things. So currently, unless your RV is inside of an RV park or manufactured dwelling park, it is not allowed to be used as a permanent residence. We do allow RVs to be lived in certain temporary circumstances, health hardship. If somebody's building a house, they can live in their RV in the meantime. But it is not currently allowed as sort of a more permanent residence. And so this last year, the legislature approved a bill that would allow for an RV to be used as a second dwelling in certain areas. And again, it's rural residential areas, not farm forest. But in this case, it also added unincorporated residential areas inside of the Portland urban growth boundary, Portland metro urban growth boundary, but again, outside of urban reserves. And so that was a really awkward way of explaining this map that's up here. It's these blue areas, those are the rural residential zones, but you'll notice some orange areas have been added to this map. Those are the urban residential zones in which this potentially would be allowed. Because there's not this 2-acre minimum lot size, this really does cover a much wider geography and a much larger number of potential properties that would qualify, over 24,000 in the urban area, just over 15 in the rural areas. So as with the ADUs, there's certain standards that you have to apply. If you are going to allow this, you can only have one RV as a second dwelling. There can only be one dwelling existing on the property. That dwelling cannot be rented. It has to be occupied by at least one of the property owners. It also cannot be used as a short-term rental, neither the RV or the primary residence. And there's a requirement that the that the property owner provide essential services to the RV space, including water, sewage disposal, electrical supply, and in some cases to a drainage system. So again, staff has included all of those standards in the proposal. In this case, because there's options, again, to add some standards, we did include a few additional ones, including a minimum and maximum distance from the primary dwelling, the 100 feet that you would see with the ADU. Again, that the RV would have to meet the same setbacks from the property lines as the primary dwelling, just like for the ADU. We added some clarifying language specifying that that the RV needs to have a permitted connection to some sort of on-site wastewater treatment or public sewer, to public water or well, and to electricity. And then that the RV must also contain a working toilet and sink. We've heard some additional suggestions about potentially requiring an actual parking pad, about requiring a cabana, like a cover in snow-prone areas. Those are certainly things that we can discuss and add to these amendments if that's something that you all choose to today. So that was a lot. I'm just going to really touch on these other pieces, the replacement dwellings in farm and forest zones. I mean, the real short version is that the rules changed, and they're in effect now, and we would like our zoning code to be in alignment with those. It changes sort of the process and some of the things that we need to look at in order to approve the replacement of an existing dwelling. In farm and forest zones, but importantly, at least for us, is it lines them all up. It was different before in a farm zone versus a forest zone, and now it's the same. And so it has become a lot easier to administer, and even creates a potential pathway for being able to approve a replacement dwelling without having to go through a land use approval, which they all have to right now. And then other housing items, they're little for various pieces of state law, additional allowances for affordable housing, creating an alternate affordable housing density bonus, adding this use called single-room occupancies, which is a different housing type, and also prefabricated structures. I'm happy to answer questions about those. Again, those are mandatory under state law, and we're just lining up our code with state law. So in your packet, there is the Planning Commission staff report. It includes findings against all of the relevant approval criteria listed here, including statewide planning goals, Metro's urban growth management functional plan. I'm not going to get into detail about those. Staff has found that these proposed amendments do meet all of the applicable criteria. Again, happy to answer questions if you have any. And so there's a couple of significant issues that I want to touch on before I wrap up. There has been a fair amount of public testimony, and there was a fair amount of discussion at the Planning Commission. And one thing that, and a number, if you've read the packet in the survey, there was a lot of comments in the survey. There were hundreds of comments in the survey. A lot of them touched on this idea of code violations and code enforcement. I think that this was largely directed at the RV option. Most of the conversation about this package has been around this option to allow RVs as second dwellings. There has been a lot of concern expressed about septic, trash, noise, and other nuisances that this would potentially create, that there's a large number of illegal RVs now and limited enforcement. Although, most people who discuss this do acknowledge it's that code enforcement has limited resources. It's not necessarily a direct attack on our code enforcement folks. And then concerned that that we're introducing this new use without providing adequate enforcement. And I think there's sort of two sides to this. On the one side, we've heard a lot of concern that by just saying this is allowed, well, then suddenly people are just going to go do it unpermitted, perhaps. But on the other side, there's this idea that by allowing this, instead of people doing it illegally, we're creating this legal pathway that somebody could do this. And so there's really two sides to this issue. This is something that you may hear again today in the testimony. The second issue is sort of just general concerns about allowing RVs as second dwellings. I sort of lumped them into these three buckets. There was definitely some concern about impacts to services and the fact that RVs are not taxed on property tax rolls and don't pay system development charges, but at the same time, they're allowing potentially another family to live in an area that would use emergency services in schools, so they're not like paying their way, I guess. There has been voiced a fair amount of concern about the fact that RVs are vehicles and not permanent dwellings, that they deteriorate faster. There are possibly maybe toxics because they're not inspected the same way as buildings. And then other general habitability factors and safety for allowing RVs. There was a lot of talk about the utility connections, although I think that staff thinks that's handled pretty well in the zoning code. And we worked with our building codes folks to craft that language. Some concerns about snow load up on the mountain, and then general neighborhood impacts and safety. So those are some big issues that we've heard and you've probably read in your testimony. And I added this because I didn't want the rural ADUs to sort of get lost in the conversation. I think that there has not been a lot of conversation about ADUs, and that in itself is telling. There's generally been a lot of support for rural ADUs. It started with our survey where we had over 70 people saying they supported ADUs in all these rural areas. There was a lot of conversation and some testimony talks about how they are a permitted dwelling and they do pay property taxes. It could create an affordable option for a family member or friends, or even potentially create a source of income and make a larger property more affordable for someone to buy if they can also have that source of income. So I wanted to just pull that out as well. We went to the Planning Commission on April 22nd. 4 parties testified. We heard testimony from strong opposition to strong support. We heard a lot. There was a lot of discussion at the Planning Commission amongst the planning commissioners. Ultimately, they voted 6-1 to approve the text amendments in this package except for the RV portion of it. So that would be sort of items 1, 3, 4, and 5 in that earlier slide. I think it's important to note that the one planning commissioner who voted against it wasn't necessarily against this package as a whole. He actually expressed that he wanted to spend more work on the RV portion of it and potentially include that in there. So staff is bringing forward to you the package with all of these pieces. It includes the RV option. And staff is recommending approval of the package as a whole, which would include the RV portion, which is slightly different than the Planning Commission's recommendation, which is why I made it muddled through that slide. And that is it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioners, do you have any qualifying questions before we listen to public testimony? And you will all get another opportunity to opine. Okay, with that in mind, We will open up the public hearing, and we will begin with public officials in the room. Do any public officials wish to testify in the room today? If so, you will have 5 minutes. Come on up. Please state your name, your area of residence, and you have 5 minutes.
Morning, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Gerald Murphy, or Murph. I'm Chair of the Clackamas County Planning Commission. I live in the rhododendron Hoodland area. And I thank you for your time. Let me have some time in front of you. Clackamas County Principal Planner Martha Fritzie delivered the most informative staff report with the attention to detail that is not taken for granted by the Planning Commission. Going into questions, Planning Commissioner Wilson started off with a comment that we go by one on these 5 amendments. We look at each one individually. Next, I had added that I have the same exact feelings about ZDO 285. Each of the 5 amendments could be a separate hearing to give each of us time to review and allow public testimony to give proper recommendation. I only had 2.5 hours to review over 400 pages of my packet. It took, even though it was mailed 6 days prior to, I only had that amount of time, and I was a nervous wreck by the time we got to this meeting. I did not have proper time to review this, and I just want to throw that in there. Planning Commissioner Tammy had a question, will ADUs be a part of property taxes? Martha, RVs will not. Tammy, will this be a burden on taxing districts? Well, we don't know. We can't answer that. Vice Chair Carey, RVs need to be properly connected to utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater. Is there a process for collecting service development charges? The yellow on the map indicates the areas that provide public utilities. We are to assume that connecting these utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater, in the yellow polygons, RVs and ADUs will be subject to service development charges? That's a question. Carrie, or Martha, it's up to the utility districts. By adding the ZDO, we are requiring the service provider to create new rules for RVs. So we're straining our utilities. Martha, if someone is approved for a hardship dwelling, for care, there is a process for hooking up, but it's temporary. Vice Chair Carey, ADUs and RVs are going to be long-term. They should be paying system development charges. We have notified utilities that this is coming down the pipe. Or have we notified? Martha, in a conversation with the larger sewer districts in the urban area, yes. What is the definition of long-term? The reason I ask this is because Cannon Beach had a prohibition on short-term rentals. To get around, some of the rental owners would charge STR renter a full month's rent, even if the renter was only going to stay a short time. So how do we prevent that from happening? We only define short-term rentals as 30 nights. Long-term would be 31 nights, response from Martha. We don't regulate long-term rentals in Clackamas County. Planning doesn't regulate STRs. Carrie, what about decommissioning RVs? When will they get to where they are no longer usable? What do we do with them? And that's a question that I'm asking also. That was, when they hit a certain point, they're not usable anymore. Do we have a path to get rid of these permanent dwellings? Because they now take another picture that we're drawing. We're saying that these temporary units that are designed for camping are now being used as permanent dwellings. So this is a serious issue. I remember a business meeting that Chair Tootie had chaired, and this was talking about how much it costs to get rid of a RV that's abandoned on the side of the road. And I remember the figure of about $4,000. Am I correct? More?
Well, we
more than-
will address this. I think you're mixing apples with oranges on that particular issue. We're prepared to address that.
Yes,
Murph.
okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So what about protections of our waterways and wetlands, including wetlands that have not been delineated or identified? Would the property owner have to identify placement with respect to the buffer zones? Will there be a plot plan and inspection? What measures will the county take to protect our water and avoid environmental impacts? Martha, it would go through a type 1 permit process just like any structure would. Michael, what constitutes a nuisance property and who determines
You need
that?
to wrap it up, Murph. We're getting to the
Okay.
end of your time.
I will. As we go through this, we voted.
By the way, I'm going to let you continue, but we have this document.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I
In
went
our
through
packet.
this a little more detail.
Okay, so can you wrap it up, please?
I will. What I can say is that RVs are designed as a temporary unit. ZDO 285 has not been given the time for a planning commission to give a proper recommendation. There's too much, it's too complex, and there's too much to it. We gave a recommendation pretty much because we were exhausted. And you have that in front of us. But it was pretty much across the board that we need more time
Thank
with
you.
this.
Thank you. You need more time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Murph, and thank you for your service on the Planning Commission. I know it's hard. I know the issues are difficult, but maybe you can appreciate the work that the county commissioners do every single day.
Thank you, Chair.
You bet.
And
Up
I-
next is,
I really enjoy doing it.
up next is Bill Merchant. State your name, area of residence.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Bill Merchant. I live outside of Oregon City, although I have an Oregon City address because it's a huge zip code. I represent the hamlet of Beaver Creek, which, if you look at that map with the blue things, that's the hamlet of Beaver Creek mostly. It's right there south of Oregon City, prime area for the ZDO to take effect. The hamlet of Beaver Creek has no real problem with built ADUs in rural areas. We already know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ADUs in our area. We know that there are hundreds of RVs in our area. We do have a problem with the RVs because, as you've heard, they are temporary. They don't last that long. And the other big problem is code enforcement, because adding this code to the county's list of codes will be in one more code that code enforcement doesn't enforce unless it really gets egregious, like the Mount Hood Center in Boring that took 6 years to have code enforcement actually take care of it. Code enforcement is so under-resourced. It's amazing that people will stay in that position. They have hundreds of cases each and cannot get to them. And by adding this, you're going to add more cases because RVs will be a problem in the rural areas. You drive past, Chair Smith, you drive past a couple of RVs that are being used as ADUs on your way up here. There's one right outside of downtown Beaver Creek. There's one in sort of across from the community college in a tiny little parcel that is not part of Oregon City. It's still Clackamas County, and it's therefore part of the Beaver Creek, hamlet of Beaver Creek. And there's a house there with an RV parked in front of it that's been there for years. So they exist. One of my concerns is how do we handle all of the illegal ADUs and illegal RVs that are already out there? Are we going to stick code enforcement, our understaffed code enforcement on them? I don't think so. What are we going to do if this passes and we have all these illegal ADUs that will now become legal? How do we make them legal? Do we have?
Are you talking ADUs or are you talking RVs?
I'm talking about built ADUs. Built ADUs. How do we make built ADUs legal after this CDO is passed? Do we go back and inspect them? How can a person who had built an illegal one make it a legal ADU? That needs to be clear because it's not at all now. And again, for the RVs, how do we enforce code on those things? So that's all of my comments. Thank you very much, Chair. I want to just mention that CPOs have had problems with code enforcement forever. Back when Commissioner Schrader and I served both on the Committee for Citizen Involvement, we heard about code enforcement then. I sit on the Committee for Community Involvement now. We hear about it still. It's a problem because there's no resources for code enforcement, so code enforcement doesn't happen unless it's the Mount Hood Center. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Tony, is there any elected official online or on Zoom?
Madam Chair, I do not have any elected officials. I do have one representative of a CPO.
Is there any other elected officials in the room who would like to testify on this? I don't see any elected officials. Now we will hear from members of the public. I have several cards here. Up first will be Rachel Cosmo McCart. I hope I said that name correctly. Please come forward, state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Before I begin my testimony, I have some photographs that I'd like to share about.
You can give them to Tony, our clerk, and he will share those with us. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Cosmo McCart, and I live in the Estacada area. I have 3 principal concerns about the RVs being used as dwellings. One is increasing the population density without increasing the tax base, that property taxes pay for most county services that RV residents will use, such as schools and roads, but RVs parked on properties don't increase property value. They aren't separately taxed, so there's no increased tax revenue to cover those use of services. My second concern is the increased wildfire danger that RVs pretty regularly catch on fire. Their 12-volt electrical systems cause shorts. They're not, as several people have already said, not meant to be permanent residences. They're also powered by propane, and propane explodes. The proposed areas, many of them are heavily forested, so there's a lot of fuel, as the commissioners will see in some of these photos. And they're remote, that there's limited access to firefighting resources. And as someone whose property almost burned down during the Riverside fire, you know, that is a really big consideration. I am also concerned about the increased burden on code enforcement, that they are hardworking folks that, you know, do the best they can with the resources that they've got. But as you can see from the photos, our current enforcement system is broken. That, you know, we have thousands of people living in illegal RVs all over the county. That within the last 3 weeks, I've turned in 23 of the most egregious ones to code enforcement. And that was without trying. that they are literally all over Estacada, Sandy area, that there are 10 of them in a 1-mile stretch on the road where I live. And none of them are connected to electrical, to septic. I mean, none of them are safe. I'm concerned that practically none of the existing RVs where people are living are ever going to meet the requirements of the proposed ZDO. For one thing, they're not roadworthy. They can't be made roadworthy. I mean, many of them, you know, are decades old. They probably can't be safely connected to septic or other utilities. I'm concerned that once we allow, you know, we let it be known that people are allowed to live in RVs, even fewer people are going to turn in code enforcement complaints. Then it's going to be like Measure 110, that it's going to be the camel's nose under the tent. People are going to think, well, it's legal, there's nothing I can do. And the complaint-driven code enforcement system already has some challenges, that it relies, as the commissioners know, on citizen complaints. So in order to complain, the citizen has to know what the law is, has to recognize.
Finish up, please. Thank you. Finish up, please.
Yes, can I finish a couple of sentences?
Finish up, please.
the citizens have to recognize unlawful situations when they see them. They have to know how to report them. They have to take the initiative to report them. They can't do it anonymously or it doesn't do any good. And they also don't trust the confidentiality of the process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming today. Up next, is it Christian? Please state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Smith and County Commissioners. It's an honor to be here in front of you today. I'm in between school bus routes. I work for the Estacada School District, and I go up into the hollers and the hollows and the hills all around where these pictures that you're looking at are shown. That's where they are. I deliver children and pick children up from these residences. In the bus barn, we talk daily about what's happening with our students because we are part of the classroom, we are part of the school and the community's ability to form our future citizens. I deal with some of the ones that are struggling the most because I drive a special ed bus and it's not for physical issues, it's for emotional issues. And this is where they live. And we as taxpayers are sending them through the most expensive IEPs available. One of my routes is to Heron Creek, which is an excellent facility in Lake Oswego on the Merrillhurst campus. The students that are going there are costing all of us more than $1,000 a day. And unless something changes, they're going to age out. And I'm very worried about their futures. One of them is brilliant. He also could be a brilliant criminal if he follows his long-term family history. There's 2 young ones that I just started driving. They're there because of, again, unstable family situation. DHS is trying to do something about it. They've had a visitation this weekend. I was afraid, and unfortunately I was proven right. Monday, they were completely dysregulated. Today, they were great. The school gives them that opportunity. Us as a community, when we can be part of their lives, we give them that opportunity. I noticed that, Martha, on the list of the 3 objectives, your third one was to enable the optional ZDOs. And I'd like to just talk about that because I was thinking about it as I was preparing to come and speak to you today. And I'm here as a private citizen, not as a representative of the school district. This is literally the uniform I wear and that I came straight from the bus barn to get here. And thank God they haven't quite started the paving on Redland Road. But we work really hard to empower. The state of Oregon seems to work to enable. There's many examples that we're all suffering from and dealing with. Those are very different things. I ask you, make a decision that empowers us, the people that care, that are volunteering, the people that love these people. Hold them to a minimum standard, please.
Thank you.
The RV is what I'm most concerned about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Joanne Forsyth. Please state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Joanne Forsyth. I live in the Stafford area of West Lynn, unincorporated Clackamas County on a 5-acre lot. And I had hoped to go to the April meeting, but wasn't able to go to that one. So I'm just here kind of as a representative of probably a lot of people in similar situations where I have been in the situation where my mother became ill and I had to take her into my home to take care of her. And in the process of that, my daughter also moved in with me to help with that. And so I ended up with a household much larger than originally we had built the house for. And really, my mother actually has recently passed away, but really would like to have had the option of adding on some kind of an ADU. And I also wanted to just point out that recently I paid about $1,500 in the Portland Metro tax, which means that under some kind of classification, I'm considered to be part of the Portland Metro area, and yet I don't have the privilege of adding on an ADU, which a lot of people in that area have. And so I just would like to, as a representation of probably a number of people in my situation, that I really am for passing this for a positive thing, to be able to add on an ADU. Anyway, that's all.
Thank you very much. Hope I'm pronouncing this right. Up next, Lisa Messina Lambert, is that right? Please come forward, state your name, area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. That's actually a first. That never gets done correctly.
Welcome.
I am Lisa Messina Lambert. I am here as a resident of Hoodland and Welch's, where I live with my family of 3. I will say we have 3 ballots sitting on our kitchen table. We want to use them really, really well. Your thoughts, the work you're doing is so important. I want to say thank you, actually, to you as well, Martha, for all the hard work you're doing. So I'll start there because we know that affordable housing is absolutely an important issue for all of us. And I'll say on the ADU side, so generally, just as a non-expert, I think this looks good, right? It makes sense. From an RV perspective, I'll say I think it doesn't look good, and for these reasons, which I'll quickly list. I think RVs are already used for family care circumstances when you're building a unit and for similar type, when you're building something and for similar needs, which makes them short-term and limited use housing, which I think that makes sense. We already have RV parks, and actually there's a proposal in our area to expand an existing RV park, right? So we have resources available to people who would like to take advantage of all the existing services. At the same time, we have RV issues already, and other folks have talked about this. I'll just use a specific example, and I'll say this. So I agree, saying RV yes, I think is going to look like a green light to a lot of folks who are not going to read the fine print or bother with that. The concept of a legal pathway is not necessarily a priority for folks around me. We laugh about things like permits. It's like, oh yeah, we live in the no permit zone, right? That's just what people say, my neighbors and others. And so the specific example that I will reference is an RV that's parked on Highway 26 at road marker 39, right across the street from where I live. And by the way, right next to an RV park. It's been there for 2 weeks. It's had bicycles on it and off of it. It's had trucks parked in front of it, trucks parked behind it. But what it is not is connected to anything or in an RV park or a suitable circumstance. And I don't know who's going to change that, and I don't know how long it will be there, but it doesn't seem right to me. And so the final thing that I would say is that I would agree and repeat all the concerns that you've already heard about RVs, and I would specifically request that the commission hold on this item until you have a chance to take a much closer look at it. We do need affordable housing stock. I'd love it to be permanent housing stock. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I understand that online there's a representative from a government camp, CPO. Tony? Sorry, I missed him.
If you would state your name and area of residence, you will have 3 minutes.
Yes, hello, my name is Nick Reinert, Government Camp, and I'm chairman of the Government Camp CPO. I'd like to just report that the notice of this ordinance change came after our last CPO meeting, and this hearing is before our next CPO meeting, so we have not had a formal CPO meeting in person about this, but we did conduct an online survey to get the feel of the community, and I'd like to read the results of that via a letter from our secretary, Jacob Thompson. Date is 5/5/2024, summary. the Government Camp CPO, representing Government Camp, Summit Meadows, and Wapanisha, request that the Board of County Commissioners prevent any zoning changes that would allow RVs in our mountain community. Survey results. An electronic survey was conducted using Survey Planet and sent to the General Government Camp CPO email listserv on May 3, 2024 at 6:18 a.m. A second reminder was sent on May 5, 2024 at 7:07 p.m. The survey concluded on May 6, 2024 with 99 total responses. Overall, 82% of the 99 respondents are opposed to the ZDO 285 section on allowing RVs. While many community members are sensitive to the intent to provide more affordable housing, the community does not see this as the right solution. Respondents were able to free text their rationale for support or opposition. These comments are pasted verbatim in the appendix, and I'll say aside, that was sent to the county commissioners already. Thank you for reading that. Back to the letter. To summarize, the community opposes for the following 4 reasons. 1, concern for lack of enforcement on criteria for use. One respondent summarized, quote, "We have so many RVs on the street without enforcement," unquote. 2, concern for snow load, freezing pipes, and cold temperatures in the winter. One respondent summarized, Government Camp's weather and climate is not favorable to RV construction with the cold temperatures for heating the rig and keeping water and sewer hookups functioning in low temperatures. This could lead to harm people and the environment, unquote. Reason number 3, concern for fire hazards in the summer. One respondent summarized, quote, would likely increase risk of improper hazardous waste disposal, unpleasant odors, noise from generators, and potentially increased risk of fire hazards if heating or generators are used improperly, unquote. Reason number 4, concern for impact on community aesthetics, culture, and property values. One respondent summarized, quote, Government Camp invested a lot of money during the TIF years to overcome its former status as a blighted community. This ordinance introduces too much of an opportunity for blight to once again negatively affect this community. Sure, there are provisions in the ordinance that are clearly designed to prevent this, but those are difficult to enforce, and realistically, we could be seeing a lot of junky RVs in our neighbors' yards. It would be potentially unsightly for our community, and we don't need the extra residences anyway. Summary of this letter. The CPO is only opposing the RV section of the proposed zoning changes in our mountain community. The mountain environment has its unique challenges when it comes to housing. We all want to support affordable housing opportunities, but do not feel that adding RVs into our community is a good reason due to our unique environment. The CPO requests that the Board of Commissioners prevent the RV zoning proposal in our mountain community. Respectfully submitted as representative of the CPO, Jacob Thompson. I'm Nick Reinert. I'm the chair of the CPO. The board approved this letter. This is likely going to be an agenda topic at our CPO meeting this Saturday, and we'll be following up. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Tony, is there anyone else online who would like to testify?
I will continue with Pat Erdenberger. Please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Pat Erdenberger. I'm the treasurer of the Hoodland CPO, and I'm here on behalf of the CPO. Good morning to the commissioners, Ms. Fritzie, her planning staff, and fellow Clackamas County citizens. I've been greatly, really overjoyed to hear the previous testimony. Very glad to hear from Government Camp. The Hoodland CPO represents a diverse population economically, culturally, and in terms of our ages. We live in a resort, recreational community, and economy. We're keenly aware that people of all economic levels are required to support the local, residential, rural, and mountain economy. We ask that the commissioners vote no on and remove the RV proposal from ZO 285 for the safety of those who live in rural and forested areas. We all agree that an ADU for a family member or others in need of low-income housing seems a reasonable and safe solution given the proposed requirement for building permits. It's adherence to building codes that keep us all safe. Safety, however, is the exact opposite of the RV scheme you propose, and such a risky plan is surprising, to say the least. Homeowners who take this option are not likely to be able to provide the appropriate safe environment for an RV dwelling. There are safe alternatives. There are 3 large and well-maintained RV park facilities in the Hoodland CPO area. We have no qualms about the need for lower-income housing, knowing that those workers deserve to live near where they work. The CPO recently approved a land use permit with conditions to add 26 new RV spaces to an existing park in downtown Welches. Our RV parks are businesses. They provide safe access for RV owners to water, septic, electricity on a concrete pad in a permitted and tax-paying facility. This sort of facility is essential for RVs, which are not dwellings. They are not built with the same specifications required of permanent housing. They frequently fail in a rough environment. This optional change to the code has been extraordinarily swift. The county enforcement regime is overburdened. These folks cannot keep up with the person power to enforce all the regulations, laws, and codes in effect now. Lack of sufficient enforcement power leaves us with citizen enforcement, which we know in this area is dangerous and irresponsible. Conditional permitting is allowed throughout the county. We object to using a vulnerable community to push this deal forward. As a CPO, we've supported one conditional permit in the past year, which was brought to us.
Thank you. You
As
need
long
to
as-
finish up, ma'am. You need to finish
I
up.
will. In closing, I'd like to remind those of us who live on Mount Hood Corridor are keenly aware of the ever-present fire danger. With each unregulated RV placement you allow, you will add a mountain of risk to our community. If it happens on a warm, windy day, and there's a spark from those extension cords, the county may lose a national forest, and we may lose our homes and possibly our lives. And I thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. Tony, are there any other elected officials online?
There are no other elected officials. I do have several other comments.
Okay, first we'll continue. In-person testimony, we have Adam Boyce, is that correct? Please state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes. 3 minutes, people. I'm going to have to enforce that because we're already at almost the hour mark, and I don't want to have to cut anybody's testimony short. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Adam. I live on Lynn Avenue next to the police station. And I love Clackamas County. I grew up in Tigard, but my wife grew up in the unincorporated area off of Holcomb Boulevard, where our family still lives. We met in Oregon City thanks to our mothers and a thriving community when I was 13, and we now have 3 kids and are blessed again to call this place home. However, I'm not sure if Clackamas wants me here. Why would I say that? We moved back to the area a year and a half ago with $100K in the bank and ready to start a little homestead. We quickly realized that our dream to own some property, chickens and goats, so our kids could have a life we want for them was largely unattainable. We rented for a year in the Redland area and then moved again 6 months ago into the cheapest apartment we could find for our family with rent and utilities over $2,000 a month. I have a bachelor's degree and I've worked in corporate HR. I'm in a career transition looking to do more with nonprofits and the community organizations. I don't consider myself poor, even though on paper it's tight for us right now. If the land is unattainable for me in Clackamas County, who is it for? I've attended both prior public meetings, and apart from the brief slideshow presentations, the public discussion is centered on code enforcement and concerns around short-term rentals. I recognize those concerns and the lived experiences different from my own behind them. However, I feel those concerns have sidetracked the discussion of creating affordable housing options, which is the purpose the state legislation was passed. With Master Ugwe, I believe one often meets his destiny on the road he takes to avoid it. If we refuse to create viable options for affordable housing, like legal and healthy long-term RV living, such as tiny homes on wheels, we will end up with more illegal and unhealthy long-term RV living. The law and codes we put in place create more opportunity or more barriers to opportunity based on which risks we prioritize. If we prioritize the status quo and ballooning property values and keeping people like me out of your communities, we will continue to exacerbate the affordable housing crisis in our county and across Oregon. If we prioritize giving families like mine more options with the simplest affordable housing solutions where we can build it ourselves, like long-term RV living in a tiny home on wheels, and ADUs, there will continue to be issues with code enforcement, and we will have communities committed to a more inclusive future rather than a more exclusive, unhealthy past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tony, is there anyone from the public online?
Madam Chair, I will begin with Jim Allen. Please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
This is Jim Allen. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm up in Sherwood, Parrot Mountain, and was noticing on the map on the website, those, I guess, rural residential areas marked. And my son and I were looking, it looked like our property was right on the edge of one of those. Who would we talk to, or is that a more detailed map available to see if we would fall within that area? And I guess if not, is there a way to, submit a request for that, or is it kind of locked in those areas you've demarked on the website?
Yeah. Martha.
Hi, this is Martha Fritzy. So 2 things. One is you are more than welcome to call or email the Planning and Zoning Division with your specific address, and we can look up the zoning of your property and let you know if you're within that area. And do you want me just to, it's 503-742-4500 or zoninginfo@clackamas.us, and maybe Tony can throw that in the chat for you. That would be the easiest way to figure out if you're in that area or not.
All right, thank you.
There is no opportunity to expand those areas because the state law will not allow the county to include areas that are not in rural residential zones. The only opportunity, I suppose, would be to constrict that area.
Thank you, Martha, on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
do you want to continue?
No, that was it.
All
Thank
right.
you. Just a simple question.
All right, that was easy. Thank you for calling in. Tony, is there anyone else?
I will continue with Dennis Tielka. Please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Dennis Tilka. I live in the Welch's area. And first I wanted to address on your packet, the county staff mischaracterized a suggestion I made about requiring a parking pad, and it says presumably to ensure a safe level spot. I was not concerned about a safe level spot, and I doubt if any of the planning commissioners took my suggestions to mean a safe level spot. Is what my suggestion was, since the county cannot regulate RVs through the building code, I would suggest the county require RV campsite pads be constructed to accommodate the placement of RVs and regulate the construction of RV pad through the building codes. That way the building department will be involved with the building codes. That way the county building department will be involved with the pad construction to ensure all setbacks. The county soils department will evaluate the septic tank and make sure the septic tank can handle the RV and the house at the same time. Make sure the RV pad has the proper connection for the septic tank or sewer. The county plumbing department could ensure the RV has weatherized water connection with portable water and at a certain pressure and verify the water source is lawful. The county electrical department would ensure that adequate power for the house and the RV at the same time, and no one will be using extension cords. Also, if the RV pad was parked in a snow zone, it would require some kind of canopy built above the RV that would withstand the snow load to prevent collapsing the flat roof of the RV. The canopy could also be used to blunt the force of a tree falling and killing the occupants of the RV. I've had 2 tree encounters in my 50 years living in the Welch's area, and I definitely would have been killed if I was living in an RV. But that way, if the county regulated the RV pad, they could be taxed and subject to the development charges. And I hope the county would tax the pad to the value of the RV the value the RV pad could generate through rental income also. During the Planning Commission discussion, it was clear that there was no mechanism in the proposal to allow RVs as to how the county was going to regulate septic tanks, portable water, electrical hookups, setbacks, or any other item except through code enforcement. The proposal doesn't state the cost of the placing an RV will be for a type 1 application. The current cost for a temporary dwelling permit is $835. I hope the fee will be substantially more for a permit for an RV that can be used forever than the $835 fee for a temporary permit that is only good for 2 years. I could support ADUs on ADUs on 2 acres, but I strongly oppose RV as permanent housing without any regulation or minimum lot size. This proposal could encourage thousands of people to move to Clackamas County from Portland to live in RVs. I don't want the county to become Portland and have people living in tents and RVs. All these people living in RVs will need county services. And how is the county going to provide these services if RVs don't pay property taxes? The county will have to raise everyone's taxes or further cuts to county services for all of us. Allowing thousands of people to live in RVs and tents will bankrupt the county. Also, what's going to prevent all the nonprofits or the Chamber of Commerce in Portland from buying the homeless people in Portland an RV and giving them money to move to Clackamas County? Portland could easily exploit this proposal and exploit all their downtown
Sir, you have 8 seconds left.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tony, anyone else online?
This is terrible, but no one else is.
I will continue with a caller identified as Macy. If you could give us your full name and area of residence, you will have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Macy Wickline, and I live in the Beaver Creek area. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'm a person who actually can support and sustain an RV living properly on my property. I heard testimony earlier that said they did not believe that folks could do that. I can. I do not want to send my mother to live in an RV park alone. Yes, there might be better access to services when it comes to utilities, but she's not going to live there alone under my watch. I hear a lot of concern for lack of enforcement. And if I could have applauded Adam earlier, I would have. It sounds like y'all see, you see these RVs that people are living in, and you see it as a violation and illegal housing. And I see it as a person who is trying to stay off the streets. It's a responsibility of Clackamas County to provide a safety net for its most vulnerable residents, not to try and find ways to fine them for simply existing. If there's already a lack of enforcement on this issue and people are illegally using RVs, that means people are desperate for housing. And it makes zero sense to me that we don't pass this measure in order to try and remove barriers and get people into housing and off the street. Our responsibility as public servants is to meet the needs of our people in our community, not the wants of others who simply don't like how it looks or are concerned about things that obviously can be addressed. This is not an us and them situation. This is us. This is our community and people here. Also, I want to add, listening to the individual who drove the bus about children living in these RVs and saying that they want to be removed because the children are not behaving well. Thank you. Where do we expect those children to go if you remove that housing option? into social services and into the foster care system, which I have been a part of, and I will tell you, it is not ideal. If I could have stayed with my mother in an RV, that would have been better for me in the long run. I hope we continue to remove barriers to housing for the people in our community. I support this, and I really appreciate this work. And Martha is brilliant, by the way. Oh my gosh, I love seeing a woman, an expert in her field. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, anyone else?
If you would like to testify and have not already testified, please use the raise hand feature and I will call on you in the order received. Madam Chair, I do not have any hands raised.
Thank you. That was an online request, Murph. I have your card here. You're up last because you've already testified once. Would you like to come up as a citizen? You will have 3 minutes. State your name, your area of residence, and please stay within the 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. My name's Gerald Murphy. I live in the Rhododendron Hoodland area. Upon doing an investigation of this, a little deeper than what we had for paperwork, I started digging around and how did we get to this position that we're allowing permanent residents in trailers or RVs?
I can address that, Murph.
Pardon?
I can address that.
I know
when
you can. Because we started this, when I joined the Planning Commission over 5 years ago, these were issues why I got on because of the homeless issue. So I want to take a look at this. How did we get here? In 2007, 2008, we had a recession that put people out in the street. It came about that investments into real estate through institutional investors became a hot item. Now, if you start looking at stats, you see 20 to 40% of home sales of affordable houses in multiple areas across the country, including Oregon, that go to institutional investors. So what we're doing is we're lowering the bar for our living standards to support these investors. I think we need to take another look at this in a different way. Also, there was an article I read this morning, just happened to catch my eye, that RVs or vehicles contain fireproof materials. That fireproof materials has been determined to be highly carcinogenic when there's long-term exposure. So we need to take that into consideration of using a vehicle for a permanent residence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to speak first on this, Commissioners, so just stand pat, if you would, please. I understand that the Commissioners want to speak, and I'm going to explain exactly how we got here today, but before I do, I would like Martha Fritzie to go over the standards and dispel some misinformation that has been presented today. No, we are not allowing extension cords. No, we are not allowing a hose. Could you explain what the health safety standards are with this?
Yes, I'll do my best. Thank you. And you're specifically talking about the RV option, yes? Okay. The RV would need to have a permitted connection to electricity. We call these, I call them, maybe it's not the right term, they would go through trade permits. It's not like going through a building permit, but as part of your building permit, you do need to permit your electrical and your plumbing and your connection to sewer or septic. And all of those sort of trade permits would need to be obtained. The RV would have to be connected to all of those utilities. And I think that was all you were asking me about, correct?
Well, the health and safety standards, electrical, water, sewer.
Yes. So going through that process would mean that you can't just run a hose from the house. That would not be a permitted connection. You can't just run an extension cord from the house. That would not be a permitted connection. And I look at it sort of like, you know, the pedestal or something when you go pull up into an RV park, and I'm not an RVer, but I've seen them, and, you know, and you connect to those services that are already provided. Septic is different, obviously. So that's what would be created on a lot. And so I think that, and I apologize to Mr. Tilka if I mischaracterized the parking pad, but I think based on his testimony, he was trying to get at that idea with providing a parking pad. I think he's talking about providing, he seems to be talking about providing these connections, these safe permitted connections. And that wouldn't necessarily be done through a parking pad itself. It would be done through all of these trade permits.
Thank you, okay. Thank you for that, Martha. The testimony today has been interesting. I've heard everything from the reasonable to the absurd. And I'm not being, I don't appreciate being misrepresented by what has been presented in writing. I'm going to say that right now. I understand probably more than anybody, when you take a look at abandoned RVs on the street, it is a horrific sight. I don't like him any more than anybody else does, but that's not what we're doing here today. As a matter of fact, as Board of County Commissioners, as the money comes in, we are able to remove those abandoned RVs off the street. And a lot of them come from Portland, admittedly. Also scheduled for May 15th or 14th of this month, the district attorney is very excited that this Board of County Commissioners is going to take up a situation where we can issue warrants on any RV that is illegally parked that you're living in. And he's ready to go on it. And I was told, oh, don't do that, Tootie. It's going to be controversial. Well, that's exactly what you folks are telling me that you want done. So I would expect support on that. I would not expect a whole bunch of people coming in here and say, Tootie, don't remove these illegal RVs because it's mean and ugly. Now, come on. We need to get to a reasonable ground on this. I was the sole sponsor of this bill in the Oregon legislature to make this happen. This bill applies to every single county in the state of Oregon. As we speak, Deschutes County is considering this because of the huge homeless problem on their streets. And if you haven't been to Bend recently, take a look at Bend. I'm appalled at what's happening in Bend. Do you think Portland's bad? And I'm going to read an email and how I got here. It came out of great compassion. On October 6th, 2022, a woman wrote me, hello, my name is, I'm a good friend of, suggested that I reach out to you to share with you a situation that is going on that I believe is very unfair. I live outside 10 miles of Sandy, and I own my home on 2 acres. I received a letter from Clackamas County saying that I was in violation of a county code. Occupied unauthorized recreational RVs. I called up a planner. She explained to me that I was in violation. I explained to her that my sister lost her husband and that she is homeless with 2 children. I let her come on my property because I have 2 acres, I have an RV, and I did not want to see my sister or my niece and nephew on the street. She was less than compassionate, the county planner, and said that I'd have to move my RV to an RV park. My staff tried to help her find an RV park, of which some of you people are opposed to expanding RV parks up at Welch's, to have people like this in. All the parks are full and they have a wait list and they don't allow certain RVs. And then she suggested I apply for a hardship. Well, as you know, a hardship is only for medical necessity, that you have to have a doctor's note, and in this case, there is not a medical necessity. And there was something's going on, and she's just at her wit's end. So what I did after, and this email goes on, and I felt a huge amount of compassion that we have people out there trying to help people who could be homeless. So I went over to our planning department. I don't know if Jennifer remembers. I says, we need to change this. We need to allow this. Well, we can't because it's the state land use law. So I dropped a bill in the 23 legislative session. And then I went to the Association of Oregon Counties. It is a state organization representing all 36 counties in the state of Oregon. And out of that came a very nice policy discussion. And all counties were supportive of this and sent a letter to the Oregon legislature. And if you don't understand how important this is, AOC usually can't agree on going forward with anything. So we dropped the bill. It's permissive. Permissive meaning you don't have to do that. And it passed the legislature. with only 2 no votes. 90 legislators and only 2 no votes because the legislature realized this is a way to prevent homelessness. And I'm going to address some of the concerns that came up today. We are in a homeless crisis. And there's those who said that these RVs need to pay fees, need to pay fees, need to pay fees. Well, and that they're adding a burden. Do you have any idea how much it costs a homeless person on the street today to get them rehoused and reemployed? It is tens of thousands of dollars a year per homeless. I know, because I'm sitting on the SHS homeless situation where there are hundreds of millions of dollars being floated in Portland and Clackamas County to try to solve this problem. And wouldn't it be better if we were able to help people before they got homeless, before they suffered mental illness, and before they took drugs? This is how it came out. If you drive down the roads in Clackamas County, I believe, Bill, you mentioned I drive by those RVs every day. Yes, sir, I do, and I guarantee you they are all illegal, and there are people living in them because they do not have an affordable alternative, and this is what the bill does. It makes it legal. And this came out of great compassion. It didn't come out of a place where we're going to try to stick it to people. I'm sorry that if there's not enough compassion in the electorate to realize that we're trying to solve a very harsh societal problem where there are very few solutions. And these are people who are willing to stand up and allow their places. They can have a rental agreement. They can have their own restrictions, only 10 years old. But we tried to make it as affordable as possible. And when you say we should tax these people, well, isn't that contrary to helping homeless people? Oh, here's a homeless person, but we need to tax them in their RV when they can't afford their house to begin with. That's the absurdity of some of this. You know, I work on this homeless situation every day, probably more than the other commissioners because I'm part of the Tri-County Planning Body, and I know I don't like it. I don't like it, but I will say this. I see so much, and I am appalled at the lack of compassion. Now, we have a very generous tax-paying society who is paying for a lot of homelessness, and that tax is going to expire. Then what do? I don't want to see more taxation on our people. That tax is horrific. I have more notes here. I think that we're getting fearful of a situation that we see in the streets that's going to become in our neighborhoods. I'm a little bit more optimistic about the human condition than that. And I would hope you people would come along with us and do that. These are rural residential zones. We had somebody talk about, up, it's going to cause a forest fire. Well, everything can cause a forest fire these days. I think some people are extremely fear-based in their arguments in this. I recognize that. I understand that. I was a person who was evacuated for 1 month during the forest fires, so you don't need to tell me about what a forest fire is like. Okay? But we have an extreme homeless situation. Yes, we have done great strides in Clackamas County to reduce it, but I'm going to tell you, unless we continue to do more, we're going to be inundated by what's happening to the north of us in the other county. We have got to start taking care of our own people, and we need a way forward to do that. Ironically, there is not much opposition to an ADU. You have any idea how much an ADU is going to cost? A lot of money. And you're all for that because it's going to be taxed. Well, if I was to put an ADU on my property, by the way, which I do not qualify because I have a farm, it would cost, I would think, a minimum of $200,000 to $250,000 to do that. I would have to charge a minimum of $1,000 in rent just to cover the taxes that I would be assessed on, not alone to provide an affordable way for somebody to live. So whereas ADUs seem to be an alternative for a lot of people who testified today, I would seriously have you folks consider how this came about. Legislators in the state of Oregon, the Association of Oregon Counties, recognize that this is one way only to address a huge policy that every single county in Oregon is battling. How we got here, how we got to the homeless situation is anybody's guess. We all have our ideas why people are homeless on this, and I'm ready to have a closing statement. We have a few commissioners who would like to talk. Who was first? Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, first of all, just one question. Is the public hearing part closed? Do we actually do that, take that action?
Caleb? Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
So I want to thank everyone for their comments, and I've been reading the material. Your emails have been coming in over the weeks and listening to some conversations about this. I put a lot of thought in this, and I think it's maybe important to tell you a couple stories that I have and some experience that I have had, which is probably unique to a lot of people in the room. I mean, not necessarily the only person. I'm sure someone else has experienced what I've experienced as well. But I do want to say on the outset here that I hear the call for compassion. I understand the well-intended thoughts and meaning about all of this. And I do understand about affordability. And so I'm going to start my conversation with compassion in mind, affordability in mind. I'm going to end with those two things, but there's a lot in between, because I would probably argue that perhaps part of this path is not really affordable. It might appear affordable in the short term, but in the long term, it's not affordable at all, in my experience. So a very good friend of mine owned an RV repair business after he retired from his business as a developer building buildings. And before I had kids, I was talking to him about RVs and so forth. And when we had our first child, I thought, well, we got to buy an RV and go out and travel around Oregon, around the countryside and so forth. And so, I went to him, his name was Jack. I said, Jack, I want to buy an RV, but I don't want to buy a piece of junk. I want to buy a good RV that I can rely on, everything else. He goes, Paul, no, there is not an RV out there market that exists that's going to meet your needs. Just bear in mind, you're going to have to work on it, you're going to have to invest in it, and so forth. But of course, I wasn't going to live in it. I wasn't just going to use an RV what an RV is intended for. RVs are intended to be for temporary use, for recreational use, I bought the best one I could possibly find at the time. And almost every trip we went out on, we had a great time with it. Almost every trip we went on, something broke. Something had to be fixed. It's just the nature of it. Year after year, the maintenance you need to do on those things, because they're outdoor, can not only be expensive, but it's a lot of work. The heater would fail, the plumbing would fail. But I want to be mindful, one person mentioned it too, there's a lot of truth to the fact that not unlike a boat, that when winter comes around, you winterize it. What winterize it means, you shut down either drain the entire water system, you put in like an antifreeze, glycol, to make it so it doesn't freeze up, where you can't get rid of the water. And you really can't use it in really cold weather. And if you do, you run the risk of the pipes freezing. You run a risk of a lot of issues. But one thing I will tell you, they're expensive to heat. They're not built to be lived in day after day after day after day. So the cost to heat one of those is exorbitant. And the power, the equipment is not made to be used every day of the week. The fan blowers, the water pump, the electrical is not designed to be used every day for your house utilities. So with that in mind, there's something that has not been mentioned here at all. It's another practical, affordable solution. And that is that, number one, I'm going to back up. When this bill was first put out there, as I thought about it, okay, well-intended, all right, I got an open mind about it. But I realized that when it was finally approved and signed, that the requirements were such that, well, you had to do all the permitting, you had to do the water, drainage, utilities. That's expensive. That's a lot of money up front to do it legit, to do it legitimate, not illegitimate. To do it in illicit connections where you're really not hooking up, and sure, it's darn affordable. You pull up, you buy a used RV, you have a used RV, and you park it, and you don't make all those connections, that's affordable. And you could argue compassionately, with well-intended, that should be okay. And I think that's what we are experiencing here in Clackamas County, is this plight that people are in. God help us all, but I hope this situation gets worse, but affordability is not. So with that in mind, it's already expensive. And an ADU is more expensive to build one from the ground up. It has a lot of those similar requirements, right? What's not been mentioned here today is also, I also have friends that are in the mobile home, manufactured home industry as well. Those are awfully affordable. It's probably the most affordable, practical housing out there. Does it take up space and land? Yeah, but if you have 2 acres, you've got land to give up. But if you're already going to spend the investment, and knowing what those things sell for brand new, a brand new mobile home, manufactured home, and what it costs to hook them all up, you have something that's far more solid, is designed to be built in every day. They last about 60 years. They're designed to last for about 60 years. RVs are not. And it's probably, over the long run, it's far more affordable. They're far better insulated. The cost of those things is down. It did peak during COVID, but the cost has come back down to a reasonable rate. But if you look at the market of RVs, what it costs to buy an RV, you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars. And if you really want a really good one, diesel pusher, I mean, you can spend up to and over $1 million. Not uncommon to spend $700,000 or $800,000 on a really nice RV. Now, granted, those are, I don't want to insult or hurt the industry. I think RVs do a great job for what they're intended to do. But you get what you pay for. And unless you buy a lot, spend a lot, you're not going to get a quality RV that's going to be, again, they're not designed to be lived in every day. So one of my uncles, when he retired, worked in Hollywood. He was not a producer, but he was a cameraman. And he and my aunt decided to spend the last few years driving around the country in an RV. He was a genius, very mechanically inclined, but he was constantly working on that RV, and he got all around the country. And then when they actually retired from traveling around the country, they bought a mobile home park, and they lived in a mobile home park, and they loved it there. So it was affordable. That was their affordable means of doing it. The price of fuel, granted, you're not going to be traveling these things. I won't go there. I'm just going to get back to the basic, my point here today. My point here today is that I think my concern is the cost for the county, because you can't assess an RV, you can't tax assess it, the cost to help people, the cost for the heating, the cost for code enforcement, all these things are going to be a negative. It's going to be a negative impact for the county, and frankly, I think it's going to be a negative impact for the person, well-intended, or person who is homeless or preventing homeless, to live in an RV. I think there's another alternative that ought to be looked at. I would not take a family member or a friend and suggest that they live in an RV for any period of time of more than 6 months, frankly. And when it comes to now in the wintertime, I would get them out of there. That would be a family or a friend, and I would treat my constituents the same way and think about my constituents the same way. And I'm being compassionate, I'm being pragmatic and reasonable. When it comes to the cost, there's a better way of doing this. It's short term, yes. Long term, it doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Commissioner Stroh, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you, Chair Smith. And thank you to everybody here at the hearing this morning, and for all of you out there who are watching, who sent in your testimony. It's very much appreciated. It makes making a decision much easier for me. We are in a situation in our housing situation in the county that is desperate. And one of the people who testified this morning gave us a half dozen 8x12 photographs of RV housing throughout the county, and it reflects some very desperate situations. pictures of dilapidated RVs with non-code compliant building sheds built next to it is heartbreaking, actually. So the RV has become, for many people, the only go-to source of housing. And we need to do something to accommodate this need, but the idea to allow RVs to be used as housing throughout the county would pose a situation that would be almost impossible for us to administer. And so there are some things that we can do, I believe, here at the county and working with our business people to provide RV parking communities that will be safe, a safe community where sewer, electrical, water would be provided, where the inspection of maybe thousands of RVs across the county would not be required, because the RV park would be permitted and inspected by the county. An example of what I'm talking about would be Mount Hood Village, where they have very different options for housing, small houses, RV parking for long-term. I called Nick Reinhardt, chair of the Government Camp CPO, this morning before the meeting, and I talked to him about the possibility of building a RV park in Government Camp. He thinks it's a great idea. It comes with some challenges because of availability of land up there. But I think this is what we need to do. We must not say to people whose only option is to live in an RV that you can't do that. But I believe we must work to make it possible for them to live in an RV in an area that's safe and makes sense. And in the case of Mount Hood Village, the people who live there in their RV, they actually have a community. They have a community center there. The children have a park to play in. It makes much more sense to me. So I've talked to people like the supervisor of the Mount Hood National Forest, who's got some land up there on Lola Pass Road for the idea of a workforce housing project that would include parking for RVs for 30 days, 6 months. Maybe you work for Government Camp or Timberline Lodge, or you work for one of the ski areas up there during the ski season, or maybe you work for the fire service as a firefighter in the summertime. You'd have a place to park long-term that's safe. So with that, I would like us to look at how we here at the county could stimulate the idea of the construction of safe and sane, healthy RV parks for an option for people to put their RV instead of out across the county in a situation where it'd be very difficult for us to administer. So with that, this morning I will support the planning committee's recommendation to support the all but one of the action items here, that being not to support number 2, to allow recreational vehicles as secondary dwellings for the time being. Thank you.
Commissioner West.
Thank you, Chair. It was an honor to early on be a part of this idea with you, and I appreciate you, as the Chair of Clackamas County, trying to be creative to find housing opportunities for people when we are all facing a crisis that we don't want to be facing. And this was creative and innovative, and that's also how we've helped reduce homelessness in Clackamas County by 65%, because we're creative, we're innovative, and we operate through a lens of compassion and trying to help our neighbor because we believe in community. I heard a lot today, and I've heard similar things many times out of Clackamas County. But unfortunately, because of bad policy, we are in the situation we are in. I believe that Oregon has the most restrictive land use laws in the entire nation. Most land in Oregon is zoned for either exclusive forestry use or for exclusive farm use. Then we put a hyper-restrictive urban growth boundary on top of that, and we are kind of left with a lot of tiny homes and now RV policies to address this issue. That was created by your Oregon government over decades. Now my generation, Generation Z and millennials, don't see the American dream the way maybe you all did and your parents did. Most of them have no desire to buy a house now because of the bad policies and the restrictions that we've put out there. Many people on the verge of homelessness because of real economic pressures now we face with soaring inflation and the inability to afford the basic goods every single day. But in Clackamas County, I said this last week, we have to fix potholes. This is a big, big pothole that we have to fix. It all rolls downhill to the local government, then we have to get real creative and get to work regardless of party and politics. Sometimes we just have to grind it out and figure out how to be creative. This is where this idea was born out of. It's not going to help this county or those struggling with homelessness or needing affordable housing to use slippery slope arguments, things that can be considered, I would consider somewhat fear-based, which isn't totally unreasonable considering of all the bad policies coming out of the county up in the north and out of Salem. I get that. I can feel that way too. Or straw man arguments. It is not okay or accurate to compare what we see with illegal camping and homelessness and the RV crisis throughout the metro area to this specific situation while providing a safe and legal pathway to allow people to provide housing as we deal with a real crisis. And this is all hands on deck. I mean, we are having a housing crisis created by a lot of people that have held office over many, many terms. The electorate seems to be somewhat afraid to tackle that issue and maybe go in a different direction in Oregon, but here we are. And we have to still get people somewhere safe to live and hopefully give them some stability so they can move out of that situation into the next situation, and then maybe one day have an apartment, and maybe one day own their own home, and maybe one day feel like that they're welcomed in Clackamas County, even though they may not be in the same socioeconomic status as many others. You're right, it's not ideal to have somebody living in a permitted, hooked up RV of any kind long-term. I have family I love very dearly that does. And that's their situation. I watched travel nurses during COVID for 2 years straight traverse the entire country to provide health care for people, and they lived in their RV to do it, to make sure that, and their RV was a safe home. They legally hooked up. They were working professionals. They chose to be able to do that kind of work, and they did it successfully. We can't have the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is good policy. We had a nonprofit last year come before us that works on shared housing connections, where maybe you have a senior that has a home paid off, but they live alone now. Maybe they're widowed. Pair them with another senior that needs lower income housing. Similar conversations about using this model through nonprofit outreach to help create an appropriate place for this RV to be hooked up, following all the rules and guidelines, working with our housing partners to help find those perfect matches for people that want to do this on their property, while also providing that affordable housing for individuals, stepping up as a community, get creative with this policy. It's not a free-for-all. There's a lot of sidebars and there's a lot of guidelines. It is not the same thing as someone camping illegally, not hooked up to anything, or what we're seeing in these pictures. And this is an issue that we are working hard to deal with, and we must work harder. We share a lot of angst around this. We have an awesome code enforcement, but really bad laws and bad policies prohibit us from being effective with this at a local level. We have the ability to deal with this. Real bad policies from people that are elected made it difficult to clean this up and to help these people. That's the truth. This is a creative way for us to be nimble on a local level to take care of our neighbors. Adam Boyce, I don't know you, but my God, I really related to your testimony. And that's the truth that we're dealing with. And it's not very often that somebody, I'm guessing you're working, you took time out of your work day, you have kids to make the time to come do this. We don't hear enough from that demographic, so thank you for taking the time. This policy gives us flexibility. As people can't get a house because of restrictive land use laws, because mortgage rates are going through the roof, because housing costs and maintenance is insane, and because of crazy runaway inflation, this gives us a little bit of a tool to be flexible as we deal with a crisis. This may not be politically smart for me to do, but I am going to support this and fight for this policy in this county and for other counties. It already passed in Deschutes County.
Oh, it did?
They're moving forward with it and finding creative ways to do it on a local level. And I think that we have the infrastructure in Clackamas County and the track record to work with an innovative policy like this to make it a success. That's why we have the largest reduction in homelessness out of anybody in the entire state as they see their numbers increase, because we are determined for good outcomes on the policies that we pass. And if those outcomes aren't achieved, then we will be nimble and maybe go in a different direction. But we have the ability with our talented staff and nonprofit organizations to help make this a success and use this policy to be very, very creative and community-oriented. This isn't turn on the lights and let her go and not pay attention to it. But we need creative solutions because we haven't been given the ability through good policy to create communities that are healthy. And that's the facts. And I'm sorry that we all have to suffer with what's happened in the Portland metro area. We all don't like it. We are all tired of it. We are all exhausted. But here at the local level in Clackamas County, we got to fill potholes, and this is just a little bit of a way to fill this one. I will be supporting this, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Schrader.
So I came in here today and I'm absolutely torn over this one, absolutely 100% with the ADUs. And I'm having to make the decision today whether to allow this policy to move forward. And I guess I'm the swing vote, folks, which is not actually always a fun place to be. But I also want to make a statement, and is that one of my philosophies is that hope is a risk that must be run. And I believe in this case that we should allow having these on people's property with sidebars. And Martha, could you go through those sidebars again for us? The sidebars of what has to happen to allow them to be there.
For an RV?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually glad you asked because I skipped over something when the chair asked earlier. First and foremost, it requires a type 1 land use application. So somebody would have to come and apply, and we would look at what they were proposing, where it's going on the property to make sure it meets setbacks. And before they could place it there, they would necessarily have to get the appropriate permits to connect to the utilities for sewage disposal, water, electricity, perhaps storm drainage.
Okay. So it would go through a process for life, health, and safety in terms of getting those hookups. That's what I'm trying to get
For the
at.
hookups, yes.
Okay, great. To me, it's not an ideal solution, but I think I agree. I think we're in a total crisis with housing at this point in time. And I am willing to move forward with a yes with this. However, I also think that we need to take a close look at code enforcement and make sure that our code enforcement people who do this work have the resources to make sure that if this is allowed, that they are done properly and safely. The other thing I would add is this.
One of the things we did, I think, very well was the Veterans Village, okay, here in Clackamas County. That was not meant to be permanent. That was transitional housing. And one of the no votes we got on that was because it was quote unquote, not really substandard housing. And we realized, and I wouldn't say that RVs are substandard, but these were pods that we built. And what we have done successfully in that program is move people from those shelters just to get them stabilized and move them into permanent housing. So my other caveat is this, colleagues, I would expect that same level of attention as we allow this to move forward will be given to folks who are in RVs, because in the end, what we need to be doing is to allow them to get into something more permanent. So I'm torn on this, but I will support this today. And I do have a noon meeting that I have to run, colleagues, so who's going to make a motion and second it? And let's move ahead.
Commissioner Savas, you're in the queue.
Yeah, well, I won't be long. I would love to know what modifications either Deschutes County either approved or is working on to make sure that what we do, we get it right as best as possible. So I might be on the losing side of this today, but it's not a win-lose. But I'm hoping that we can be thoughtful about maybe trying to get it right. So I don't know that there's necessarily any urgency to do this today. I think that having more time to study this would be valuable. What I did want to say, I forgot to say, I made a note, but I skipped over my note, and that was that when these things fail, when there's water intrusion, even for a mobile home or any home, frankly, when there's water intrusion, then mold develops and they become very unlivable, dangerous. And so whether it's the Veteran Village pods, which had a roof, composition roof that are designed to last 25, 30 years, far better, RVs don't have that. Manufactured homes do. Manufactured homes, mobile homes are ADUs, as I got confirmed yesterday. In this ordinance would be recognized as ADUs. Correct, Martha?
Manufactured homes? Yes.
Yep. They are affordable compared to an RV. And long-term, I guarantee you, they're way affordable. So I think that's the way I would like to see it, but I don't see any traction that way. And I remember years past when we were in the Veterans Village, we had, I gave a couple tours of people to look at mobile homes and manufactured homes because they are very livable, they're very practical, and they are very affordable. There's also, by the way, as I can look into it, I just thought of it now, but I had a friend of mine who's trying to help someone who lives in a manufactured home, an old one that is failing. It's way old technology, and there's water intrusion. There's a number of health issues over there. But I was informed that there was a state statute for mobile home parks, specifically mobile homes, that the owner or the operator of the park or the home there's a state statute that requires them to maintain it at a livable standard. RVs won't have that.
And perhaps that is something we can look at then in the near future. I would agree. Thank you.
Commissioner West.
I'm ready to make a motion if you guys are.
No.
Go ahead.
Do you want to bring up in discussion or do you want to do it
My light
now?
was on before yours. I got a comment to make.
Commissioner West, you have the floor.
Chair, I move that we approve ZDO 285 as recommended by staff.
Do I hear a second? Commissioner,
I'll second that.
there's been a motion, we approve ZDO-285, and Commissioner Schrader has seconded. Commissioner Scholl, you have the floor.
Yes. Again, I've heard the word compassion used here today, and I believe we need to be compassionate about those who have no real other option than to live in an RV. But again, until such time, I'm convinced that the county can enforce the code of potentially thousands of RVs some who will make an application in accordance with the code, some who will not, until I'm convinced that we have the ability to administer thousands of RVs across the county. Today, I will not support the motion because I will not support allowing RVs at this time. I will support the ADU piece of this and the other amendments, but we need more time to look at how we will deal with this RV issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we need a clarification on the motion.
Okay.
What was your motion?
I move to approve ZDO 285 as recommended by staff, which were everything presented to us today.
Including the RVs?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners. Look, this stuff is hard. What I'm willing to do, if we pass this today, I think we need to pass this and get it out there, but I'm willing to listen to some of the recommendations that have been brought forward to us today. Maybe the length of stay, maybe the age. I'm willing to do that at a later date and add maybe a few restrictions that people are the most objectionable to. But like I said in my opening statement, I've heard everything today from reasonableness to the absurd. And especially, I'm quite compassionate about the school bus driver. So I worked in the schools. I was a librarian. I saw everything. People would camp out in my library. Parents would leave the kids after school in the library because they couldn't have anybody else to pick them up at work, and they couldn't get there at 3:30 off their jobs. But to make the characterization that all children who live in these RVs on a person's property don't need help or don't need supports from our school system, that's where they get the supports, Mr. School Bus Driver. They get supports. You can email me, you can talk to me later. And it's the school system that identifies these children and gets them into services. And this is not meant to be a forever situation. This is a hand up, and this is help. And I come from a position of compassion because I see so much that's happening in this state in the Tri-County areas. I think we need, if we have some really good information here from the people, we have really good information from commissioners. I'll be the first to admit, as the author of this bill, it is not perfect, but we do need to do something in a county that has 1.2 million acres and very restrictive land use that does not allow everybody to have a house, which would be nice if we did. Our tax base would increase, we have more money to spend, but we don't. So Tony, would you please take the poll?
Commissioner Savas.
No.
Commissioner Scholl.
No.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 3-2. Thank you very much. Folks, I'd love to reach out to you, talk to you more about that. If there are any planning, CPO meetings, Hamlet meetings that are out there, and if you want to send in maybe some fixes that we can have at a later date, I think this board is willing to consider that. Yes.
Chair Smith, there's another paragraph in the script under the motion is approved that it would be great if you could read.
I want to thank you for keeping us legal. This has been a very emotional situation, at least of which for me as well. Okie dokie. Page 3, is that correct? The proposal has been approved and recommended by staff, or it has been approved by this board, is what I'm going to say. I will now direct staff to draft an ordinance reflecting this decision and include it on the agenda for the board's adoption at the June 6th business meeting. And I do want to follow up by saying one thing. Yeah, I see this in the county, okay? What we did today is not this. This, I feel, is a gross misrepresentation on the intent and the compassion involved in this RV bill. Thank you very much. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I just want to say I do support everything in the ordinance minus the RV section as crafted today. If with modifications, I could possibly approve it in the future, but as it sits today, I cannot. Thank you.
Thank you.
I, just one last comment, Chair. too.
Yes, go ahead.
I do think we are going to have to work on some modifications, and I'd be willing to work with you on that.
Yes.
But I also think that the crisis is so bad that we have to get people into some stable housing. This is not the perfect way to do it. But I would encourage all the CPOs and the Planning Commission that our work here is not done with this. This is, like I said, one of these hope is a risk that must be run situations. Let's see if we can get people housed. Let's see if we can work this in a way that's safe for everybody. And as we said, the intention is not to have the kinds of things we're seeing on the street. It's really getting people close to a relative. In my mind, that's what really swayed me, close to a relative in something that they can do quickly so they're warm and safe and have food and get stabilized. So again, Bill, thank you for being here today. Hope I didn't disappoint you too much, my friend, but Commissioners, I'm going to hold you to that this is a work in progress, please.
Oh, sure. Just like a lot of our regulations are a work in process. Thank you all for coming today. We need to adjourn. See no further business before this commission. We are adjourned.